Well, we've got a series of stories next that kind of go with what we were talking about, this new woke culture and the cancel culture, which goes hand in hand with the woke culture, because if you are not woke, then you get canceled. And that's what we see happening in our society in so many different arenas. One story we've got here out of Central Florida, in fact, the University of Central Florida, is a University of Central Florida professor who was just fired for 2 tweets that people did not like, that woke people thought, that is wrong think. You cannot talk or think like that. This is not a free country. We don't have the First Amendment, the right to freedom of speech. We don't have freedom of the press. We don't have freedom of expression. We don't have any freedoms right now. It doesn't seem like you try to exercise. I mean, they talk about these freedoms. They pretend like we have them. But if you actually try to exercise them, you're going to lose your job. You're going to get canceled. You're going to be deplatformed. And we see this across the board everywhere in our culture. And how quickly we've fallen into this mode of operation where this seems to be okay. I mean, most people, they just turn their back, put your head down, and walk away. Don't stand up for any of these people being canceled. Don't stand up for these people being fired or deplatformed. You know, you could get in trouble too. That's what, oh my God, move away. And that's what people are doing. People are scared to even talk about these stories. I think it's a real shame. I mean, we had a very strong culture of freedom in this country, and how quickly we seem to have lost it. And I don't know if we'll ever get it back. It seems to be slipping away so quick. The one thing that I have to remember is that we know that at least 74 million people voted for President Trump, and there are a lot of people in this country who still believe in freedom, who still think that the civic history, the governmental history, the system of government that this country represents, which was the first in the world of its type, a constitutional republic with a Bill of Rights, with respect for freedom, that this is something unique and different, and it really is. I was talking to some people from other countries, including Venezuela, over the weekend, and what we have here is not replicated. There's no place else you can go. We remember hearing Maximo Alvarez at the Republican National Convention talk about that when he came over from Cuba, and his father told him, there is no other place other than the United States. There's nowhere else to go where you can be free, where you can live your life. They have a free enterprise system. You have freedoms of speech. You can say and think what you want, and you're not going to be crushed by the socialist overlords. But it seems that the socialist overlords have come here, and we've got these people who have placed themselves into power. And there's obviously a significant portion of the population that goes along with what they want. And they are going to do what the communists always do. And that is they publicly humiliate and destroy their political enemies. And it's done as a message. And are you receiving the message? Don't you see what's going to happen to you if you speak up? If you talk about certain topics, don't you see what will happen to you? And this is exactly why they're doing this.
You see it first in the industries that they have control over. So, for example, if a professor gets out of line and says something to a classroom or publicly that isn't part of the group think, then they lose their job.
That's right. And we got this professor out of the University of Central Florida, Charles Nagy, who just had this happen to him. And basically, he made a couple of tweets. Now, you don't have to agree with his tweets. You don't have to agree with the sentiment that he expresses in his tweets. It is a sentiment against the hyphenation of Americans, against the identity politics of saying, I'm a this kind of American, I'm an African American, I'm a Hispanic American, I'm a gay American, whatever. All this hyphenation is it's divide and conquer, right? It's driving wedges between us. We're all Americans, and we can live together under our civic culture. But what's been happening over the past few years is we've been told, no, you fit into different groups, these identity groups, and then you are aggrieved because of your membership in that group. And you're aggrieved against another group, primarily, say, white male Americans. They are the oppressors. They are the colonizers. They are the bad and evil ones. And all these other subgroups, we are against them. So don't you see that's divide and conquer? When we're all Americans, we all benefit from the governmental and economic system that we live under. We benefit so much that people are trying to get here from all over the world, and they have been for decades. They've always been trying to come here. For centuries, people have been trying to come here from all over the world. There's a reason for that. There's a reason people form up these migrant caravans, and they come marching through Mexico up to our southern border to come into our country. You see any migrant caravans forming up in Idaho to march down to Guatemala? You ever see that? You ever see anybody doing that? No. Why? Because we have opportunity here. We have an economic system that benefits everybody. Even the poorest in America have a better shot at making something of their lives than you do in another country. So we also have the freedoms, which are being eroded so quickly. But anyway, Professor Charles Nagy wanted to talk about this. So he posted 2 tweets. He exercised his freedom of speech. This doesn't have anything to do with what he's teaching in his classroom, right? He doesn't require his students to read his tweets. He doesn't require them to agree with his tweets. But he said some things that some people would find a little bit inflammatory. Okay, he thinks they're true, and maybe it is factual. It seems somewhat factual, but he's expressing an opinion also with it. But anyway, he said some things that were probably in today's culture, this is wrong thing. It's ill-advised to say this because something bad will happen to you. Well, he gets reported to the administration, and they do this investigation of him. He's been on campus as a professor for 22 years. They investigate him for 8 months. They produce they interviewed hundreds of witnesses about bad things that he's said. He's a bad man. And they produced this 240-page report. Now, come on. If you got to produce a 240-page report to fire somebody, that almost sounds, you might say that sounds a little trumped up. That's overkill, isn't it? Anyway, they've now fired him. That happened at the end of last month. They've said, we fired you because of this report, that we've obviously done a very thorough investigation. We've looked into everything that you've done, and you are no longer a professor, effective essentially immediately as of the end of the day of this letter. You're fired. And he'd been on academic paid leave since the beginning of January. So they've trumped this up. Now, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, or FIRE, as they call themselves, wrote about this particular case, and they said that, to be clear, UCF does not want you to think Nagy is being punished for his speech. They've written a 244-page report, which involved interviewing over 300 people over 7 months about incidents covering more than 15 years to convince you otherwise. But this is all either theater or self-delusion by UCF administrators who want to think they aren't motivated by a desire to censor a controversial professor. The entire process of preparing this report was motivated by complaints about Nagy's tweets. So he makes 2 tweets that people don't like, and his head is put onto the chopping block. He's now been fired, and they've created this whole backstory to try and convince you that he didn't get fired because of his 2 tweets, when in fact that's exactly what just happened. This is a tenured, multi-decade professor at the University of Florida, and this is a message to other professors. Like you said, Roxanne, this is a message from academia that if you hold these kind of ideas or express these kind of ideas, you will be gotten rid of. And right now, he's just been fired.
How bad were his tweets?
I can read them to you. I don't think they were that. Look, they're controversial. Okay, let's face it, they're controversial, and I personally think it's against this concept of identity politics. But we'll tell you what his tweets were right here, just reporting the facts of his tweets. He said, if African Americans as a group had the same behavioral profile as Asian Americans, on average performing the best academically, having the highest income, committing the lowest crime, etc., would we still be proclaiming systematic racism exists? ? That was one of his tweets. His second tweet is, black privilege is real. Besides affirmative action, special scholarships and other set-asides, being shielded from legitimate criticism is a privilege. but as a group, they're missing out on much-needed feedback. So those were his 2 tweets. Again, some people would say that's somewhat inflammatory. I mean, I remember there was a book that came out called The Bell Curve, and that was considered very inflammatory. The author said it was based on factual data, and I'm sure Professor Nagy would claim that his tweets are based on factual data as well. The point is, this is America, and you can have an inflammatory opinion. You can express an inflammatory opinion, and you shouldn't lose your job. You shouldn't be canceled. If it's a bad opinion that people shouldn't hold, then let's argue with Professor Nagy. Let's debate Professor Nagy and try to help him understand how he's wrong if that's the case.
Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.